The revised ultimatum from Donald Trump to Russia. Here's what he said with Keir Starmer during his meeting.
I'm going to make a new deadline of about 10 or 12 days from today. There's no reason in waiting. There's no reason in waiting. It's 50 days. I want to be generous, but we just don't see any progress being made.
After this was said, gentlemen, Russia responded in a variety of ways, as it generally does. First, we had a massive strike that was backed, of course, by Russian President Vladimir Putin. The New York Times highlights the prison which was attacked in Kiev that killed 16, but it's part of a wave, as the New York Times says, of strikes directed at 73 Ukrainian cities and villages over the course of the evening after this ultimatum was made. Patrick, your response to all of these developments, given what is not only happening in Ukraine, but overall with really the U.S.'s posture vis-a-vis Russia?
That's the question, isn't it, Danny? The U.S.'s posture. What posture? That's the question. Is I don't see any posture to speak of. I see a lot of pivoting. I see a lot of flip-flopping. I see a lot of confusion. And I see a lot of, quite frankly, desperation by Ukraine itself, of course, but also by the Trump administration, taking these kind of ambiguous remarks about, deadlines and so forth. It's at some point it loses credibility, and I think this is the problem. I don't think. See, the problem is Donald Trump. There's no W. There's no political W for Trump, but there is a W. There is a W for certain people, like certain vested interests. The W is, and this, in my opinion, this is the fallback position of the United States. The W is to extend this conflict, to keep ramping up arms sales. To watch European defense stocks go through the roof as they have been for the last year, and U.S. defense stocks as well. That's a W. You can't say that from a political point of view. It's kind of an unsavory thing for any politician, even Trump, to say too loudly. But that's the W, and the W for Russia is to continue making the same type of steady progress that they're making on the battlefield. And so and Medvedev's right. One way or another, Russia's going to secure its national security interests. It's going to defend its interests one way or another. And it doesn't look like the United States or Ukraine or NATO is going to stop them. So that's kind of where we're at. This is kind of an unofficial standoff, if you will. That's what it looks like, because Russia's not going to abide by any unconditional demands or, terms of surrender laid down by Donald Trump. It's not going to happen. So there's no serious talk from Washington about the political settlement. And from Russia's point of view, let's just be honest, it hasn't changed much since February 2022. It's not much different than the original Istanbul Agreement. Yes, the territories and the borders have changed somewhat since then. Ukraine's lost more actual territory, and they'll probably lose more the longer it goes. For Ukraine, it's cut your losses. But that's politically untenable as long as Zelensky's in. So the big question, Danny, is what comes after 50 days or 10 or 12 days? Is it going to be another sneak attack? Because that's what happened before the last impasse, the last negotiations. We saw a gallant raid, the brave Ukrainians hitting the Russian nuclear deterrent. Or are we looking at regime change? Is Zelensky coming in to replace Zelensky? Or are we just basically playing the same game we've been playing for the last how long of this facade of negotiations? Meanwhile, as I said initially, the vested interests already have their game in place. And so that's the real game behind the scenes. Russia has its game. The West has its financial game as well. And the rest is political theater for us. That's the question. What is going to happen after 10 or 12 days?
I agree generally with everything that Patrick just said. I think that what's really, really important to always keep in mind is that we are witnessing the clash of two systems, generally. which makes the conflict in Ukraine the same conflict that we're witnessing in the Middle East, the same conflict that might happen with China in the future. And the logic of this conflict is such that you can't be, you have to be on one side or the other. And the two sides, the two systems of governance is the Western oligarchic, neo-colonialist, imperialistic system of governance versus pretty much the rest of the world. And now it so happens that there are certain powers in the world that are willing and able to resist the diktat of the empire. These powers being primarily Russia and China, and also Iran. And so, the question is then, what side did the Trump administration take in this conflict? And my conclusion, based on the past 6 months of Trump administration's activities, has been that Trump has really taken the side against the empire. So very often Trump makes these statements, which are, I think, largely psyops. He makes these statements for certain audiences, and he's in the UK now. And the UK is the most desperately warmongering side in this conflict with Ukraine. The empire that we have in the West today is still headquartered in the city of London. That's still its strategic, spiritual, and it's still the main headquarters. The United States has been mainly the financial and military muscle for the empire. And I think that Trump has been consistently trying to extricate the United States from this imperial role, but this is a very complicated task because the groups and interests that have benefited the most from the United States being the empire's enforcement arm are the most powerful groups in the United States, being the banking cartel, the military-industrial complex, and certain other groups. And so he's in London now. He's in the UK now. He's meeting with Starmer. I think that he has to give them the impression that he is still game for being the enforcement arm for the empire. But I think that in reality he has no intention of doing this. If we go back to the beginning of the administration, even before he was inaugurated, we had Marco Rubio, who said that the United States, that his administration is regarding the post-World War II order as more than obsolete. He said that it has even been weaponized against the United States, and that the new reality are the multipolar integrations. Now, it seems fairly definite that Trump administration has chosen the path of multipolar integrations. Where I have my doubts is that Trump being Trump, he won't accept joining the group as one among the equals, to say, okay, now we're going to make nice with Russia, with China, with India, with Iran, and so forth. He's going to try to, it seems to me that he's going to try to hijack the project and make it his own. So derail the BRICS movement and try to finagle his own multipolar way. So I wouldn't take his statements about giving Vladimir Putin so many days or however many days. I wouldn't take that seriously at this point. Let's remember the only way that he could change course in the war in Ukraine, and even that wouldn't be enough, if the United States actually stepped in and said, right, we're going to provide a real ironclad security guarantee for the government in Kiev. Trump's not going to do that. And so everything else is just marginal posturing, positioning, psyops, deception. I think it'll take time for us to know what his true intentions are.
On the one hand, Alex says that there is reason to believe Trump is finagling a kind of different posture for the United States. The results, it seems like, of this conflict appear to be going in the same direction that they've been going under the Biden administration. So what is your assessment of this and your response to Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I reported on, Marco Rubio at the time. I think it was an interview he did with Megyn Kelly, actually, where he mentioned the multipolar world. And, I think he's just been, or the beginning of the administration, first couple of days. And that was the last I heard of anybody in the administration saying such a thing. So while it's on record, and many of us did report at the time, and I was obviously very happy to hear that, but everything that has transpired since has been unipolar rhetoric coming from the administration. And, I'm not privy to any plans they have behind the scenes, but how the optics globally are that the United States is acting more like a unipolar actor than ever before, because previous administrations, even the neocons, to a degree, still acting within the international system, and the international system is comprised of rule sets. Okay, obviously the United States has set many of the rule sets, but their allies as well have adopted those through the G7 and these other consensus building institutions over the years, and trade, commerce, international relations, treaties, agreements, or accords all take place within that rule set. The problem with Trump is it's hard to identify any discernible adherence to any rule set. It's almost like it's diplomacy on the fly, it's intimidation. It's almost like international racketeering. Even if, Trump was building a golf course in Miami and, having to deal with the Teamsters and the local planning permission, the governor and whatnot, you can't get everybody in to sort of do the project and halfway in pull out and then shoot the governor or threaten to bomb the state legislature, which is kind of what the United States is doing internationally. So at that point, the whole system breaks down. So there's no deal to be had. If you can't attach yourself or follow or any agreed upon rules or terms of engagement, like you have in the business world, like we have in our countries in terms of laws, of course, the United States flouts, to a large degree, international law is a facade and international norms are a facade, but you still need them in order to pretend or at least give the impression that there is some order, and then people can work together to either make things happen, to stop bad situations, to pause, to rebuild. The United States is basically, I think, taking a wrecking ball to all of that in a very short space of time, starting with the Biden administration, mind you, but the last 6 months of the Trump administration haven't been very good. If you look at all the three major flashpoints, you have Ukraine, you have Iran, and then you have Gaza in the Middle East. And in terms of the U.S. deals or diplomacy, they fumbled all three of those. And then let's add global tariffs to that as well. There are four major geopolitical, global, major flashpoints and areas of concern. The U.S., I think, in my opinion, have fumbled on all four of those. And to the detriment of the United States, I think economically, on the tariff wars, but now he's using tariffs in a way that tariffs were never supposed to be used, which is he's using them as sanctions, as another form of sanctioning. And the ultimate here is this, after 10 or 12 days, I guess he's threatening 100% tariffs against anybody as a form of secondary sanctions that dares to trade with Russia. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen for the mere fact that this is the president that got elected, okay? Many of us voted for that man because he said he'd end the Ukraine war in 24 hours. So that's a big jump from ending the Ukraine war, then declaring war on economic war, okay, because that's what sanctions or weaponized tariffs are, as tools of coercion against your allies. So they're not going to be able to do that to China, India, or Europe. Europe trades with Russia. Europe buys energy from Russia still, billions worth, uranium and so forth. It's just not going to happen. So like, where are we going with this? That's the thing. And at some point, is everything that the U.S. or this administration says publicly, is it just going to be disregarded as, oh, well, it's what Trump said this week, could change next week? And I think everyone's just going to kind of go along and do their business and basically tell him what he needs to hear, nod okay, and then, cross your fingers and hope for the best. But, I don't think any of this stuff is going to stick. That includes the trade deals. That includes the economic deals. Look at that trip to the Middle East with Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Trillions of dollars of direct investment into the United States. That's not going to happen. But he got a huge win public relations-wise. Fox was just over the moon over that. And the same with von der Leyen this week. Similar sort of pronouncements afterwards about DFI into the U.S. from Europe. Europe doesn't have any money they can't throw $700 billion into the U.S. and invest. I mean, Europe's having trouble holding its seams together at the moment. So to pay for the rearming of Europe, they have to go into deficit spending and austerity measures to prepare for World War III. They can't prop up the U.S. economy. Like, what's Trump talking about? So that's the thing. How much of this is just, just throwaway public relations fodder to get from one situation to the next, and how much of it is actually based on anything real? What are the policy changes? What's actually going to change beyond the rhetoric? That's the big question.
Alex, so Russia has been very clear-headed throughout this whole process. Here's Sergei Lavrov, foreign minister of Russia. He had these words to say at a recent forum he presented at. We have a lot of things to do. The main of these things is, of course, to defeat the enemy. First time in all of Russia history is fighting alone against the whole West. Quite striking words. And Alex, also Russia is continuing to make huge gains on the battlefield. This is from Ukrainska Pravda, Ukrainian source, that Russia is edging toward Pokrovsk in a semi-encirclement in the Donetsk Oblast, and that this is about weeks away or so from falling, and that's that would be a huge defeat for Ukraine.
Well, Russia is doing what it's doing because it is existential for them. The Western powers. And when I say Western powers, it's been France, it's been Poland, it's been Lithuania, it's been Sweden, Germany, it's Ukraine. The actual power is the banking establishments that end up financing all these wars. But they've been going at Russia for more than 300 years now, and it is very clear that they will never stop. And so for the Russians, it's very clear that they have to simply remove the source of threats, that they have to remove their security threats and sources of their vulnerability. So what the Russians are doing makes perfect sense. And the way they're doing it has been extremely cautious and responsible. They have, at every step of the way, they gave peace a chance. They, 4 days after they started the special military operations, they already started the negotiations. So I think that history will judge Russia kindly, in the sense that Russia's actions can be explained and they make sense. The Western actions, it's very different. It's been some kind of a fanatical obsession with destroying Russia, partitioning Russia, regime changing it, and turning the Russian population into basically slave labor force to help Western financial interests extract Russian resources for the benefit of Western corporations and banks. I don't know whether we can arrive at sensible judgment about what is going on the basis of public statements by either Russian side or the American side. I think that they are all concealing their hand. Trump has, Trump, not just during this 6 months of his term in office now, but practically since he started into politics, he has been consistent in the sense of wanting to extricate the United States from its imperial role and returning it to its Republican traditions. We saw that in his first administration, it didn't go so well. He got practically immediately sabotaged, and he got run over by the big Russiagate scandal. So it's very difficult for me to imagine that he just made that pivot from January on of this year, and that he put the United States back in the driver's seats of the unipolar global order. It's very hard for me to accept that. It just doesn't really make sense. And if that were his intention, then why the whole huge, massive, elaborate deception to begin with? Because he was facing very powerful headwinds to even get into the White House. He could have just as easily said, hey, business as usual. We're going to continue exactly the way the Bush 43, Obama, Biden, Clinton, everybody else did. And he would have faced no opposition, no impeachment, none of this. And then, this new camaraderie with Keir Starmer, I don't buy that for a second either, because, let's go back to the Russiagate scandal. That whole thing was cooked up by the British intelligence services. And I know as a fact that Trump very perfectly understands this. And he understands that the British have done everything to prevent Trump from becoming president. Keir Starmer himself sent 100 labor operatives in the last stages of the election to try to turn the swing states to Kamala Harris. Keir Starmer's political patron, Tony Blair, was the political patron of Barack Obama. And not only that, but remember who cooked up the dossier, the Russiagate dossier was Christopher Steele, the MI6 guy. The Christopher Steele took Donald Trump to court in London, and in April of this year obtained a £685,000 judgment against Trump. So this is not being talked about, but the idea that Trump is somehow oblivious to all this and that he's suddenly treating Keir Starmer's cabinet as friends, partners, and allies, I can't quite square this with what I know about Trump. I think that there's a great deal of deception and psyops going on, and that it'll take time for us to understand. But he's also said many times, in many statements, he said that he trusts Vladimir Putin. So it makes me wonder if there aren't continued communications and cooperation between Russia and the United States that are ongoing, and that all of these public statements are for public consumption to their own domestic audiences. And I'm not necessarily talking about the average voter. I'm talking about perhaps the military-industrial complex, the intelligence apparatus, the deep state, and all of these people who, are still hoping somehow to, as the Brits say, flood the zone around Trump and turn him around to their camp. So I'm generally very suspicious of all these public statements, because I can't see Trump pivoting from his long-held position, 1776, and turning the United States into a global manufacturing powerhouse, which is probably his main reason for going all with these tariffs like a loose cannon. And so I tend to try to find enough dots to connect below the surface appearances of things to try to understand what's going on. And now, if it is true that they are preparing to replace Zelensky with Zaluzhny, I'm going to say this, and I'm totally going on the limb because I've been paying attention to this story since the time Zaluzhny vanished for 2 weeks in Ukraine. Remember, he just vanished. I think that the Brits are walking into a trap. And I think that if Zaluzhny takes over in Ukraine, the West is going to lose Ukraine, and Ukraine is going to pivot back into the Russian orbit.